Hello everyone and welcome to the Kootneeti's YouTube channel. I am Niranjan Marjani. Today we are going to talk about Myanmar. It's been 10 months since the military coup when Myanmar was thrown into political instability. There have been calls to restore democracy, but the Myanmar military has not responded positively to those calls. What does this coup mean for the people of Myanmar, for the democratic process in Myanmar, and for the region? To tell us more about this, we have with us Mr. Hunter Marston. He is a PhD candidate in international relations at the Australian National University and an expert on Myanmar. Mr. Hunter Marston, welcome to the Kootneeti.
Thank you so much for having me, Niranjan.
Let me start by asking a very general question. How, or rather, what is the situation on ground is in Myanmar? The protests, the violence, what is the status of those?
Well, in general, the situation on the ground is a very complicated and violent one. Protests have slowed, but they have continued despite military crackdown, while armed resistance and military attacks, as well as sporadic assassinations of regime administrators and local officials and opponents of the military, so both sides, have continued. The country is essentially split along multiple fracture lines. There are several, more than several, ongoing civil wars, some of which have been tied to ethnic minority groups and disputes dating back to the 1940s and 1950s. And then some more recent People's Defense Forces, which have cropped up in opposition to the military rule. And the military has tried to sort of divide and conquer in order to play sides off of one another and not to engage in a sort of total war, engaging with all militant groups at the same time.
Now you have worked in Myanmar and you have worked with the Burmese people. In one of your interviews, you said that while people did not agree with military junta's policies, they also did not identify themselves with the opposition. And this makes democratic transition a difficult or a complex process. So is people's mindset same even now, or has it changed?
Well, actually, the people's mindset has shifted dramatically since the coup. The military has long been sort of the dominant obstacle to Myanmar's full democracy and ethnic unity across various minority groups. But today, what you see is various political parties that had disagreed with the National League for Democracy and Aung San Suu Kyi's Burman ethnic sort of dominant narrative coming together to resist military rule and support a more inclusive and democratic Myanmar in the future. And that even includes groups, the Bama majority ethnic group, reaching out to Rohingya, who the military had targeted with violent crackdowns in 2016, 2017, and expelled across the border to Bangladesh. And now the people of Myanmar have realized that it's the military that is really the common enemy here.
Actually, a part of you already answered. That was going to be my next question, because when it comes to democracy, are NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi the only options for the people?
Well, Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD remain very, very popular. The NLD won a resounding majority in the 2020 election of November. And the people would still like to see Aung San Suu Kyi have a future political role. The military is currently pressing a variety of political charges against her, including violations of COVID, as well as a import-export ban on the use of walkie-talkies, which is really just ludicrous. But at this point, a variety of political parties, not only the NLD, have come together to form the National Unity Government and promise a wider, more inclusive vision for the people of Myanmar. And that's really what has the people's support and is starting to receive some international attention.
Do you see a democratic system in Myanmar where military has no role, because the constitution of 2008 reserves 25% of the seats in national and local parliaments for serving military officers? Would military ever give up its role in Myanmar's politics?
Well, that's really the big question today. The National Unity Government and committee representing the Pudong Luta, or the National Unity Parliament, have already called for the removal of the 2008 military drafted constitution, which never enjoyed widespread legitimacy. And like you said, promises 25% of parliamentary seats to the military, to active duty military. The military itself is in a battle for survival in the country. It sees no opportunity for surrender from its current path, and it's prepared to shoot its way out of the current crisis to suppress resistance to its rule. So that said, it's really in a standoff at this point, and it appears that neither side is willing to back down. So political compromise appears very, very unlikely in the near term. That said, the military has been suffering from some defections encouraged by People's Defense Forces and the National Unity Government, which are trying to provide some safe spaces for military defectors. So if that continues and the military sees its power or grip on power loosening, it's possible that anything could happen.
Several countries such as United States, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, they have issued a statement on increasing violence in Myanmar. Do you think because of the way democracy is perceived in Myanmar and in Western countries, there would not be any engagement between them?
Well, there has been engagement already. Members of the U.S. State Department, high-ranking officials, and several governments from the European Union have engaged with representatives of the National Unity Government, just not on a very out in the open basis. So that limited support does stem from concerns about the National Unity Government's support for conflict with the military. At this point, there's really no alternative but to take up arms in resistance to the military. Peaceful protest has not worked, and the military has showed it will not hesitate to shoot innocent civilians. So the National Unity Government has taken up armed resistance, but it's also advocated a sort of code of conduct to prevent torture, prevent the killing of civilians, and the Western governments have still not fully embraced the National Unity Government based on some of these concerns.
What is your view on ASEAN's role since the coup in Myanmar? Could it have acted any differently?
Well, I'm not surprised it acted the way it did. The coup has posed a major crisis and identity challenge to ASEAN, and it's really exposed the democratic versus authoritarian splits within ASEAN itself, and maritime versus mainland ASEAN states. But that said, it has been vocal to an extent in its condemnation of the military junta and military coup, and unfortunately, not all ASEAN countries. Some are quieter, like Vietnam and Cambodia and Thailand, which have been a bit more protective of the military regime in many ways. But the 5-point consensus remains a viable political roadmap for dialogue. It's basically that ASEAN has no enforcement mechanisms to convince the military to negotiate in good faith based on that consensus.
So ASEAN hasn't totally neglected Myanmar's issue, but in general, it is felt that that was one of the reasons why Myanmar is tilting towards China. So shouldn't international community try and engage more, at least those countries which consider China as a competitor or even a geopolitical threat?
Well, in some ways, India is a great case example here, as well as Japan. Both countries have been a bit more pragmatic in their engagement with both sides, the military and opponents of the military, and have been less supportive of international sanctions against the military. And for many reasons, obvious reasons, I think New Delhi realizes that China's influence in Myanmar is extensive, and it therefore is hesitant to be too critical of the military, because the Indian military itself had built up significant ties with Myanmar's military in recent years, and it fears that alienating the military will mean Chinese influence just deepens. That said, I think Myanmar wants to avoid, and the military wants to avoid relying exclusively on China. So partners like Russia, Japan, and India will be even more important going forward.
But considering the kind of isolation it could face, Myanmar military's dependence on China would increase in the coming days, which it doesn't want.
It doesn't want that. So its behavior is surprising in many ways because the Myanmar military has been very distrustful of China's aims in the country, especially some of its strategic ambitions with special economic zones, the Chiaokyu port, and former General Thein Sein, who ruled the country from 2011 to 2016, was the one who suspended China's hydroelectric dam in Kachin State. So the military has actually resisted Chinese influence in the country historically, and some of these concerns date back to the Cold War, when the Kuomintang and Chinese Communist Party or the People's Liberation Army were battling within Myanmar's own borders. So a huge issue of strategic concern for Myanmar's military still today. But that said, the military has also been pragmatic in reaching out to China to try to solicit investment. The Myanmar economy is extremely damaged by the coup, and Min Aung Hlaing has signaled interest in resuming Chinese infrastructure projects and hydroelectric projects in particular.
As you mentioned in the beginning, armed conflicts have increased in Myanmar between the military and the ethnic groups. So wouldn't this make restoration of democracy difficult and strengthen the military rule?
Well, it does play into the military hands for sure. And particularly the divisions among the various, and there are many, People's Defense Forces. There are reportedly over 300 different PDFs, or People's Defense Forces, across the country, not all of which report to the National Unity Government. And then there are at least 15 different ethnic armed groups as well. And these myriad conflicts are what actually enable the military to sort of sign ceasefires with some, placate others with political concessions. For instance, it lifted the terrorist organization label on the Arakan Army, which was a fierce opponent of the military until 2020, when the military and Arakan Army signed a ceasefire. So the military wants to avoid fighting all of these groups at the same time. But at the same time, the various ethnic armed groups have not been completely supportive of the National Unity Government because of lingering distrust of the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi, as well as because they benefit from sort of sitting out the fight and seeing what happens. Some of them have struck up deals with the Tatmadaw or Myanmar military, especially the United Wa State Army, a large group in the north, which numbers in the hundreds of thousands, probably the most powerful armed group in the country. And they have their own economic interests, their own ambitions for political sovereignty that the military has more or less respected because of their power.
And even here, the China factor is important because China is said to be supporting these ethnic groups. That is also one of the reasons why the Myanmar military doesn't want to depend only on China and looks to expand its relations with other countries.
That's right. There's not a lot of daylight actually on China's direct support for some of these ethnic armed groups. Reportedly, Beijing has extensive influence with the United Wa State Army. The Wa in particular have ethnic ties to Chinese across the border in Yunnan province. And the Kachin Independence Army in particular has acquired weapons from various Chinese arms dealers that it's used to fight the Myanmar military. So in many ways, the Chinese influence or Beijing has played a sort of double game, which I've written about before. On the one hand, it's cultivated ties with Myanmar's civilian government, previous civilian government, as well as the Myanmar military, while it's also sort of clandestinely supported various ethnic armed groups which are fighting against the Myanmar military.
So okay. To conclude, then there is no scope for improvement in the situation, at least in the near future.
In the near future, no. What Myanmar has taught us, however, is that really anything is possible, and to expect the unexpected. it might appear right now that the military has the upper hand, but at the same time, it's losing soldiers every day, and the economy is in shambles. It's quite possible that someone within the regime of Min Aung Hlaing will speak up based on grievances. Their economic interests are not protected, and they don't see this being the best path forward. It's quite possible that someone would be able to, that if there's enough division in the ranks, that there is a clear possibility of saying to Min Aung Hlaing, look, we did not calculate on this going this way, and you've made a terrible decision. It's time to seek an alternative path. Yet the Myanmar military has no history of backing down. So really, all bets are off.
Well, Mr. Hunter Marston, thank you for your time and for speaking to the Kootneeti.
My pleasure, and thank you for hosting me.
We hope you found this interview informative and insightful. You can tell us what you think in the comment section below, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on various social media websites, the details of which are on your screen. Thanks for watching.